All right. Our featured speaker this morning is Michael Berube, the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Sustainable Transportation and Fuels, U.S. Department of Energy. In this role, he oversees the DOE's vehicle, fuel cell, and bioenergy technologies and the new Joint Office of Energy and Transportation responsible for EV charging. Michael is a recognized leader in the transportation sector with over 30 years at the DOE, the automotive industry, and at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. As the Deputy Assistant Secretary, he is called upon by stakeholders across the public and private sectors for insight and strategy on how to achieve decarbonization of the transportation sector. Michael oversees a large portfolio of directives, including research and development to increase access to domestic clean transportation fuels, activities of batteries and the related supply chain, developing a network of hydrogen hubs, deploying a national network of EV chargers, and the deployment of clean transportation technology across multiple transportation modes with the DOT and the EPA. Prior to joining government, Michael spent 23 years with Chrysler, specifically in the areas of environmental, energy and safety policy, product development, and marketing. He has worked on a broad range of electric vehicle, connected car, and advanced powertrain initiatives. Michael has a Bachelor of Science degree in Civil Engineering from MIT, worked as both a graduate student and researcher at MIT, where he received a master's degree in the Technology and Policy program and a master's degree from the Sloan School of Management. Michael currently lives in Washington, D.C. with his wife, Michelle, who is also here today. Michael and his wife have 4 kids. Please welcome our featured speaker and future NCRO member, Michael Berube.
Thank you very much, Mike. It is really nice to be here today. It's nice to see a number of familiar faces in the room as well. A few I had a chance to say hello to earlier. If I didn't, maybe afterwards we can connect a little bit, and you can just good to catch up. Just maybe give a little bit of history for myself, and I have some slides that I want to share with you about what's going on back in our area in Washington, D.C. and in the automotive technology area and other parts of transportation. But maybe I'll spend a minute or two just for those that don't know me. So I joined Chrysler in '92. Gordon Allardyce brought me into the company at the time. Tom Gage, you might remember a few of those names. But an interesting story at the time, because it is fun to get together with, when you get together with people, share stories of the past. Many of you know Ron Boltz, I'm sure. So I came in, as Mike said, I had this, graduate degree from MIT, not typically the career path at the time of people coming into Chrysler. And they had this position, though, in the regulatory affairs group that they had kept open. They said, we want someone with a little bit of a different background. So I wrote in, sent my resume, and they said, man, this is okay. This would be different. So I come to Detroit, and have an interview discussion. They said, well, you got to go talk to Ron Boltz, because this was '92, summer of '92. So back summer of '92, GM had just announced the largest loss of any company in the history of the country that hadn't gone bankrupt. Chrysler was at that time developing the LH car platform. It had not been out public yet. There was a general view that, Chrysler would be bankrupt within 6 months, was on the outside streets. So that was this background. So I come over and they say, oh, this should be great. The problem is we have a hiring freeze, but go talk to Ron Boltz. I see Ron, and Ron's looking, say, we got this hiring freeze. Yeah, it'd be really good. And I have to basically, the only person in the company that can approve a hire is Bob Lutz. He said, I'll be honest. I think if you came here, you're not going to stay. I mean, your background, we just don't typically have people here. Why would you want to come here? And, I pretty quick on my feet generally. I just said, look, to be completely honest, there's a woman involved. I said, I had met someone who lives here in Detroit. She's got a law practice. She's established here, and I'd like to move here to be with her. So I'm coming. He's like, oh, that's easy. No problem. I'll write a note to Lutz right now. We have you for life. That was Michelle. And we worked out quite well for us. We ended up getting married, and I think it worked out pretty well for the company at the time. We actually saved that memo. Back in the day, right? Everything was done with these paper copies, right? And it'd be circulated, and you'd have 10 different VPs and others writing notes and the thing and go around. It's crazy to think about. But that one somehow made its way back down to me. So I saved that note from Lutz. So I worked, in regulatory affairs for a number of years initially. That was kind of my background, kind of policy. But I really wanted to get into the mainstream business of the company as well. So Ron Bolt at product planning. I moved over to product planning, worked on a number of vehicle platforms over the years, and back into the safety area. Maybe some of you I worked with on the safety side. I did a lot of the safety policy work at the time. I worked together a lot with folks here. And then about that time, it's hard to remember all the details in and out. I moved over to the marketing side, and it's interesting. I looked back at the career, and right about that time, Mark Chernoby was taking over some of the different engineering portfolio, and he said, Michael, your value to the company is that you understand engineering. You're an engineer. You know that you can talk the technical, understand it, and you know what those marketing guys are talking about. Because man, us engineers have no clue what they're thinking about most of the time and how they think about stuff. And you can talk to politicians in Washington, like something else that is just not. So you're kind of our translator between those. And that's kind of what I do with my career path. During the FCA days and when Mark Ioni came, I was in product planning. I led most of the product planning for the vehicle lines at some point at the time under Joe Veltri. Ran Alfa Romeo brand. So I don't know, Alfa sales doing okay over at Galling. Hopefully, I brought Alfa back with the 4C, launched the Alfa brand here, worked on most of the new Alfa products, ran the Chrysler brand, pretty much all of the new Jeep products through the FCA days. I took kind of a leadership role on. So have a lot of background there in the company. When I left, so I left in 2015 to go work in Washington, D.C. Took a year off to think about what I want to do and wanted to get a little bit back to some of those roots working on the future of automotive, but in that regulatory space. And someone asked me earlier today, like, how has it been different working in government versus working in the automotive industry? I will say Chrysler trained me very well, right? That was something Chrysler always did. It trained its people really well to do other things. A lot of things were very similar. Who here is worked in finance organization? I'm sure we had some finance folks. I was well trained by Chrysler Finance. I got to the government. They were like, man, you understand this budget stuff really well. I said, it's really not that different. Finance organizations, one place or the other, are kind of the same. That part was all pretty similar. And I work essentially in an advanced R&D organization, RD&D, research, development, now demonstration, deployment. And some of that, is not that unsimilar. The big differences, I will say, are the appetite for risk, right, is very different. So in government, and this is not about government employees, this is really about us as the public. We are not very forgiving of when government does something wrong. In general, the public kind of crucifies that doing the wrong, which creates a atmosphere of not wanting to take risk. Now, the downside is you really want to get stuff done, you got to take risk. So people who are a little bit more mission driven, people that come in a little bit later in their career, like myself, I certainly didn't go to government to make money. The salaries are not what they are in the private sector, but you want to get something done. So that ability to take risk and find ways to help your team do that has been, just different. And then just hiring practices, boy, because in federal government, everything is about, making sure there's absolutely zero risk of appearance of any problem. So that slows things down. But we've been successful the last 4 or 5 years with all the money that's come in at really increasing our hiring capability. So let me share a little bit of what is going on in my world over at Chrysler. As mentioned, I have a pretty large portfolio. So I manage about $1 billion a year of annual RD&D work. Research, development, demonstration work. And then recently with the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act and the infrastructure law, sums that are just very large, even by automotive industry terms, probably just in my own area, another $15 to $20 billion of one-time appropriations of money. And then all the tax credits on top of that are absolutely game-changing. So I'll take a step back. When I think about what is it that I do, what is my goal, right? And it really is about how do we make a better transportation system for everyone? And that covers every mode of transportation. So you think about transportation today. It's essential to modern civilization. You literally couldn't have cities without it. It's how cities formed is because of transportation. it is certainly central to the economy. Just look at when there are any strikes that involve transportation, the economy immediately is hit in so many ways. It has been historically a major driver of the growth of entire countries and economies in the US, going back to the original automobile industry, really, Europe, and now in China as well. It is core to growing the core economic capability, industrial might of countries, especially in the automotive industry, because it's just so big. It is unusual as far as industry goes. It is largely centralized in a very small number of players. Think about the automotive industry, shipping industry, aviation. These are really big industries, but a relatively small number of companies that really have a large use, which becomes very important if you're trying to create strategies to think like something, how do I decarbonize? How do I create massive level change? And if you have, thousands of companies versus a few dozen, it's a different approach. Also, transportation today is the second highest expense for a typical American household after housing itself. Second highest expense is transportation. Transportation is very uneven in its availability when you think across rural, urban areas, suburban areas, economic strata. Not everyone has the same level of convenience and access to transportation. 70% of all oil used in the United States globally goes into transportation. So when you think about the impact of petroleum on global politics and the global economy, right? That goes all into transportation largely. It is still a major source of emissions, particulate and NOx emissions in the United States. Many parts of the country don't have problems, but other parts, especially around local communities, if you live near a port, you have really high emission levels. Any place where trucks gather, high level, or trains gather, again, thinking of the whole transportation system. And it is the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions. So if we're going to address climate, we have to do that. So when I think about what my job is, right, my title is, Deputy Assistant Secretary for Sustainable Transportation. What I think of when I think of sustainable transportation, what does that mean to be sustainable? First and foremost, we have to have a transportation system that meets everyone's needs. It's literally got to get people to the doctor's office, get the kids to school, get you to work. For businesses, it's got to get the goods there, right? So first and foremost, it's got to work. It's got to be reliable, right? It's got to be resilient. It's got to be there every day. Second, it has to be affordable. People have to be able to afford that transportation system. And it has to ultimately address greenhouse gas emissions. We have to address that. You look at the climate crisis upon us, but very much in the thinking, the approach we take, and I say this is me, this is all of the government on transportation, is you got to think about it in that order. You can't just start with emissions or climate or regulations. You got to think about the core need, and you got to make sure you're delivering on that. You got to do it affordably and address it. And the good news is we are now in a position where we can actually accomplish all those things together because technology has advanced. So how many people here worked in the FCA days under Marchione? I got a few here. So Bob and I shared many days, long days in product committees, and every now and then you would have someone come in who maybe hadn't presented before, and they would have the unfortunate of saying something to Marchione, well, Mr. Yeah, we hope this. He'd say, hope? Excuse me? And I'll tell you, in those meetings, half the time you weren't sure if he was paying attention or what. He was doing 1,000 things. All of a sudden, he'd look at you, hope? I'm not paying you to hope. I'm not paying you to hope. You say, I want a plan. You can have an outrageous, aggressive target. But if you don't have a plan to get there, I mean, hope, what's that going to do for us? So come back when you have a plan, sir. Out the door. So that is the approach we are taking in the federal government, my team, on when we look at how do we decarbonize all of transportation. We need to have a plan. So we basically laid out a strategy about 5-6 years ago, started really laying this out. So that's interesting to think about, administration. So I'm not a political appointee. I'm a career person. So I worked at the end of the Obama administration. I served through the Trump administration and now through the Biden administration. So we said if we're going to we have to have a plan that addresses every mode of transportation. So certainly light duty cars, huge amount, half the emissions, but trucks, rail, trains, aviation, and this pie chart is US. If you look globally, some of these are much bigger. Aviation is growing big. Maritime is very big globally as well. So we have to have cover every mode, and it has to be achievable and realistic. Given the time frame we are in, and you all know the product life cycles of cars, think airplanes, trains, or even longer. We need to be deployed in technology in the next 5-6 years so you can have fleet turnover time so that you can get to close to 100% penetration out in 2050. So it has to be achievable now. It has to be strategic. So Dave Rooney's not here. Who worked for Dave Rooney? Anyone work in marketing? Yep. Dave had a saying in the marketing days that would say, like, spending a little bit of money everywhere on advertising means you know nothing of what you're doing. Just, shotgun approach, spend a little bit everywhere is nothing. You need to make choices, and that's hard. What's going to be the right place to spend the money or not? And in technology, that's what we all do. We said in this plan, we can't just say, well, we'll just work on everything everywhere. We got to work on the things that can work, that can meet the cost targets, be affordable. And sometimes it won't be the perfect choice, but it'll be the best choice that's achievable. We also said we need to leverage market forces. We need to take approaches that have market forces at back. And when you make choices to do that, because otherwise we'll never get there in time. We are talking about transforming the entire transportation system across the country and ultimately globally. That will impact every single household, every single business. So you got to do it in a way that actually has a market pull if you're going to try to make it happen at that magnitude. We need to focus on incremental solutions, meaning solutions where you can start deploying a little bit, and a little more, and a little more, versus one where you got to build out an entire infrastructure of the whole country before you have your first deployment. That will just take too long and is unlikely to ever really happen. And in everything we do, we have to address full life cycle emissions. I'll show you that, kind of meaning that you have to look at total greenhouse gas emissions. So we look at the entire emissions across the whole economy. I manage transportation. I have a colleague that manages all the power sector, where power comes from. Another one that manages all of buildings, industry. That covers everything. There's a small slice in agriculture, which I kind of tend to cover. But so you have to look at it. You can't just move the emissions from one side to the other. And we have to think about the electric grid and how we're going to manage it. So let me tell you, I'll walk you through quickly how we did that. First, we basically said we have to have all of government working together. And I will say, one of the things people sometimes say is, well, government doesn't coordinate, doesn't work together. Not now. We are coordinated. We work together. It is hard. Just think about in a big car company working across organizations, across divisions, getting, the sister company over in Italy with the one in Germany, the one here, all working together. Same thing in government, but it can be done if you work together. So we signed a formal agreement, had the secretaries announce that to say, we are going to have one common plan for transportation decarbonization across all the agencies working together. And we're going to work that picture on the bottom I put there, because I got together with my colleague and said, we all like each other. We all work together, right? But the problem is we often work together after the fact, right? Versus starting up front, sharing budgets. Oh my God, is that a scary thought? I'll spend my money, give you some of my money and take some of yours and share budgets to get the common mission done. But that is what we have gotten to. We announced it. I put this picture here. 4 cabinet secretaries, the president's climate advisor, a lot of horsepower there. That picture in the bottom, when we announced this plan, we had representatives from every mode of industry. The automotive industry, Zella should be in there somewhere, the rail, the aviation, maritime, every industry, because we're not going to get there if we're not doing it together. This can't be government saying, you shall do this. It's got to be industry who has the power and the economic mind, the activity, and government working together to do it. So that was very much the approach we've been taking. So we looked at it and said, we need a strategy. I'll think just real high level, those 3 groups: convenient, efficient, clean. Every one of those boxes really represent every part of transportation. The first part, think how convenient, how much transportation you use. So the engineers in the room, many of us engineers, said it's a pretty simple equation for greenhouse gas. If you think about how much transportation we use times the efficiency of whatever it is you're moving something, a person, a good, how efficient is the thing you're using to move it, times the carbon intensity of that fuel you're using. Multiply those 3. If you want to get to 0, you got to either make them all really small or you got to make one of them 0. We're not going to reduce the amount of transportation we need. That's just not, we should do a lot. We should encourage micromobility, bike lanes. We should encourage reduction in congestion by all means if you live in a city. All those things are good, but at the end of the day, we're probably going to grow the population, grow the economy, grow the amount of things we have to move. We can definitely make things more efficient, vehicles more efficient, airplanes, other things, but you can't get, efficiency alone is not going to get you 50% reduction. It's just the physics don't work that way. So you got to get the carbon intensity of the fuel close to zero. That is how you get there. This is in the plan. Again, I'm not going to walk through all the details, but we went through and laid out every mode of transportation, and we looked at the technology, and the little symbols represent about which one's going to dominate. And what you see is we're going to need battery electric in a huge way, and I'll walk you through more details. We're going to need hydrogen, but we're going to need it in the right place, not in cars. Hydrogen in cars is just not going to work, and we can talk through why, but in heavy duty trucks and in other applications can be really important. And we're going to need sustainable liquid fuels, absolutely, in certain places, but there's only so much of that liquid fuel that you can that we have available in the country. So I'll walk you through. I want to show you two deep dive into light duty, and I'm going to check our time here, how we're doing, into the light duty vehicle space and then aviation. But we have a detailed plan on every single one of these. In fact, in the next few months, the high level strategy has been published, about 70, 80 pages. The detailed plan for every mode and the actions is going to be published in the next month or two for each one of these. And they've been the basis of many, many meetings with stakeholders, both the industrialization side, the people that have to make it work, and the technology side, and the economic and the policy kind of working together. So let me talk about light duty vehicles. So I'll go through, obviously near and dear to our, the core strategy that we are laying out is that we need to electrify those light duty vehicles. And by electrify, in the term, my terms I'll use here, a plug-in electric vehicle includes both a battery electric, all battery, or a plug-in hybrid. If it has a plug in, right? We're not talking a hybrid powertrain that has no plug. Great technology, helps improve your efficiency incrementally, but doesn't get to where you need to be. So I want to walk through, these are the key questions I'm guessing that you might have, that I have, that others might have. First, a little EV market update. I'll talk through that. One of the advantages, having someone like with my background in Washington, there aren't many people who are leading this type of work that know sales and marketing, that can talk residual values, that can analyze that data. Similarly, that know the technology and engineering side. So I'm kind of that person in Washington, in the White House, in the administration, as these decisions are getting made to kind of provide that voice. So I want to walk through the market update. I want to talk about life cycle emissions. I want to address batteries. Okay, a lot of batteries and critical minerals in the supply chain. That is going to be a huge part. Where's it all going to come from? What are those pieces? Where are we at? Then the EV charging network. What's going on with these charging connectors, because that's like a big change that's happening, and then talk about how does this work with the electric grid. So quick market update. I'll zip through. This would be kind of, those of you that were back in the sales and marketing days, this would be like if you were going up to the senior execs and say, what's the status of the market? This is over time, market share. The red line is plug-in electric vehicles. Basically, you can see there was some steady growth, but then dramatic growth for about 4 years. That growth has has slowed down so far calendar year to date, but it is growing. So we about 10% roughly share of market for plug-in electric vehicles. 1 million already through August 24. I should have updated that. Since then, the sales was growing at 50% year-over-year rate. That rate is not sustainable. That is a huge growth rate. Growth this year is about 10% industry-wide, but it's really important to understand where is that coming from. So about 10% growth calendar year to date. One other quick point, if you look at it's a little hard there, probably the screen's a little small for you. There's a question about plug-in hybrids, which are the lower line there. Plug-in hybrids have remained kind of as the overall market's grown, they've grown. It's remained a pretty steady share, about 15% of the market. It hasn't really grown a big amount. So this chart shows sales calendar year to date by brand. So it's when you look at, and I give this presentation about everybody once a quarter to the White House, the highest levels of government, what's going on in the industry. Sales have, are growing 10%, but that's far cry from 50%. But actually, a lot of automakers are still growing quite a bit. The big thing is Tesla has had a sales drop, and Tesla was 60% of the market. It's dropped now closer to 40%. But other than Tesla, right, other automakers are growing as they're bringing out new products. And when you look specifically at who's growing at what rate, this is actually from maybe a month or so ago. GM is continuing to grow a lot because they had new products coming out. One of the truisms in the auto industry is the number one predictor of sales growth is product availability. You can't sell what you don't have. So product availability, new product availability is what really, especially in a new segment, drives growth. GM came out with their new Equinox and their Blazer that they had some quality issues last year. They was delayed about 6 months. That has now propelled their growth quite a bit. So new product availability is a big thing. Toyota, those are all plug-in hybrids. They have one BEV, small market share, but they've really grown because new plug-in hybrids they've had. I'll say those are percent growths. So actually the Toyota is a really small number. So it's a big percent, but a small number. Looking at inventory, a lot of discussion on inventory, what's been happening. This basically shows EVs versus BEVs inventory. I point out in that circle back about 6-8 months ago, there was a lot of hue and cry from the dealer body. For dealers here on the on inventory levels, and what was happening is you had these bump ups in the EV inventory because there had been very, very little available. You couldn't get one. There was none available in the lot as the entire industry has been going through a post-COVID realignment to going from having no inventory, more or less, just taking orders, to now back to a little bit more of a traditional place where you have inventory, of course, and you have lower prices, incentives coming back up. There was a little bit of an imbalance where you saw both the EV, the traditional market, and EVs kind of out of balance in inventory. That has stabilized. Look in the last 12 months, basically both of them had a very similar availability levels overall. And the way I view it is you got an all new market, it's 10%. That's a lot, but it's 10%. It's not, 50%. So you have something that's small and you're dialing it in. New products are coming out. It's still lumpy. The market is still very lumpy. It's up and down a little bit as new products come out. As that grows, it'll become more mainstream and act more like the market overall. This is a chart of availability. This is from JD Powers, who does some great work there, Doug Bett's team over at JD Powers. What this shows is the purple line is premium segment, the blue line is the mainstream segment, and it says what percent of people have an EV in the price and product category they want. So if you're in the premium market segment, 74% of people can buy an EV that's in basically the same vehicle size, category, price range that they shop. And then the blue line is the mainstream. Again, and this is part of their measure of how is the market doing. So eventually you want to get that availability up to 100%, that everyone has a product that they're interested in. Because if someone wants a particular style of product and there just isn't an EV in that market, then they can't buy it. But that is growing, especially in the mainstream segment. Interest, so we think about the purchase funnel here going down. Interest on EVs, this basically looks at how likely is someone to say how much do they say they are going to buy another EV. 80% of EV owners, if you own or leased an EV, 80% say I am likely to buy another one. People who have those products like them a lot. I point this out because there was a widely reported McKinsey study that we cannot figure out how they did the math on that. We've tried to replicate it, but they came out with a radically different answer. There's about 3 or 4 high quality studies, S&P, JD Powers. Again, they run this data every month. So we look at it every month and it hasn't really materially changed. So people that have it like it. People that have never driven one are the most likely to say, I'm not going to consider one. Transaction price. Now, this might be really surprising for you. So on the left-hand side is customer-facing transaction price. That's literally at the deal. So if you're a dealer, basically the bottom line price after all the incentives, after all the dealer input to the deal, what is the price being paid? PIN gets this across, tons of the sales. That shows the blue line is where it is relative to its comparable gasoline vehicle. So if you look at where there's an EV, what's the comparable market segment? It basically, if you're above 100 there, it says it's actually more affordable. The EVs are selling at transaction price after all the government incentives, after all incentives are in, slightly below. So they're slightly more affordable. It's better than 100. So they're slightly more affordable than their comparable vehicle. Now, we have to remember most of the EVs have been in the premium segment. They're starting to come down to the mainstream segment. So, and there aren't as many in the lower price of the mainstream. But when you look at apples to apples, sorry, I take that. That's the chart on the right. The chart on the right is customer facing transaction price, showing they basically have come together. The chart on the left is a full TCO 3 years. So after 3 years, what is it? And that's where you actually see the EV is better because You save $600 a year in fuel on average. You save $6,000 over the life of the vehicle in lower maintenance and repair. So when you look at that on a 3-year basis, even if you're paying more for the vehicle or paying the same, you're actually making money overall. This is ultimately the core of why I believe we will get there in the EV market. For the customer, we actually can create a product that, and I'll talk a little bit about how we get to the same price level without government incentives, because this includes some level of government incentives now. But you get to a product that's more affordable, that people like to drive. They enjoy it. If you've driven an EV, it's a great experience. We got to address charging to make that convenient for folks. But and then if you're an automaker, I work with the senior folks. If you're an automaker, think about that EV, man, the powertrain is easier to develop, lower lifetime warranty cost. There's a lot of things that are really advantageous if you're an automaker to doing an EV over a very complicated, 9-speed transmission, internal combustion engine with a lot of bells and whistles on it. That, as many of you know, that's advanced technology to make those engines. So that's a quick snapshot of where the market is. Life cycle emissions. This is a current snapshot. My team maintains what I believe is the best model on full life cycle emissions in the world. It's used by countries around the world. It looks at every single aspect of emissions, from exploring for oil or making the wind blades, or all the way through to the end use, every aspect. And this just shows where we are today in 2024 on a typical gasoline vehicle. These are like comparable vehicles. A EV today, just plugging into the grid using average grid electricity, is about 52% lower emissions. If you look at that same vehicle in 2035, that same vehicle will actually be 80% lower because the grid is getting cleaner. And that's using what we think is a pretty realistic level of renewables growing on the grid. If we hit our goals of getting to 100% clean electricity, it'll be much better. So, all right, we talked about sales, we talked about emissions. I want to talk about batteries. So about 6 years ago, towards the end of the previous administration, we in government laid out the first US industrial strategy on batteries. And in the past, having an industrial strategy was not something that we typically did in the US. We typically kind of like, let's just let the market decide. We said, we are going to have our lunch eaten globally. It was already starting in other parts of the world, and we need our own strategy. Okay, back to marketing, we need a plan. We can't just, bellyache about other countries, what they're doing. We need a plan. So we said we need a plan of how we can have our own lithium ion battery industry. So we laid out a comprehensive plan across multiple government agencies and started implementing and executing that plan. So in that, so I'll tell you where we are today. Our core battery strategy, I would describe as these 4 key goals. First, we're diversifying the number of battery chemistries you need to put in EVs. Today, EVs have pretty much 2 battery chemistries in them. Everyone has one, except Tesla is using also a iron phosphate. We believe in the future there'll be about 4 chemistries. What that does, it just spreads the load out. 4 different sets of minerals, 4 different sets of items. You don't concentrate it all in one space. And we at the Department of Energy, I'll say we know a little bit about this. So my team, I'll brag a little bit. We have basically developed every battery technology that's used around the world today. When the Nobel Prize was given, 2 of the 3 researchers were people that were still working as of that day that it was announced on our battery. One of them still is, unfortunately passed away. But we are really that engine with the national labs that work for the Department of Energy working to develop new battery chemistry. So we think about 4 different chemistries. We also think that we can get much lower rare earth minerals in those future chemistries. So we're developing ones that use things like silicon and sulfur, super earth abundant minerals. Expanding recycling dramatically, we believe we'll get about 99% of all EV batteries recycled, and that we can then get probably in the future about 40% of all raw materials coming just from recycling. And by the way, when you do that, it's cheaper than going back into the ground, getting ore out of the ground, doing all of that you got to do. You have this minerals already been processed, and you can actually keep them at that process level. And then building a more diversified supply chain. So meaning we need it not all concentrated in one country. So that's the core strategy. So this is shows where battery cost has been over time. As you can see, it's dropped dramatically. If you look at that number towards the bottom, $100 a kilowatt hour on a cell level, the EV tax credit, the production tax credit provides about $50, $55 a kilowatt hour, depending on what your technology is. Literally half So let's think about when that law is passed, $100 a kilowatt hour, $50 now in production tax credit, cut the cost in half. That was a key part of our industrial strategy. We said, if we're going to jumpstart this industry, we need to get batteries being made here in the United States. We're working, as I mentioned, across a range of battery chemistries. These are what will be the batteries of 2030 and beyond. So, and I'll say one of the things, when we go out and ask for ideas and proposals on batteries and battery chemistry, we don't get just 5, 10, 15 proposals. We get hundreds of high quality proposals. And that has actually gone up. What has happened is the ecosystem on battery work, as more and more of it's being used, as more people are thinking about it, more PhDs are getting educated, the number of ideas are increasing. And that's a key thing. I study technology as part of my job now and think about it. Some technology, you get to a point, you just kind of hit the limit. There's only so much you can do. It's important for us to understand where we are. We are not out of spit on batteries. We are, over the next 20 years as a world, as a planet, going to rely on batteries for so many things. Think about what we do today. How much uses batteries? Think about things we have today we could never have done without batteries. That battery technology will continue to proliferate in so many ways and so many things that we do across the country. That is true with our military as well. The military today lives and relies on batteries, so we work very closely with them. So we have seen, so what has happened as part of the industrial strategy with the investment that's being made, an unprecedented level of investment, $170 billion in the last 2.5 years of new investments that's announced and actually going in the ground. Many of those are actually plants going. If anyone's been driving by Savannah, Georgia lately, unbelievable. I mean, we've all seen automotive plants, been around plants. It was really caught my eye because this is like one of the biggest automotive complexes, one of those massive battery and automotive EV being done by Kia Hyundai down there. And that's, it's happening all across the country. So $170 billion, more of that is on the battery side. Some of that's also on the plant side. We now have you can see that chart over time, 1,400 gigawatt hours of battery cell capacity in the US. That is enough to cover well over 50% of the vehicles. So in general, depending who you're talking to, but most of the auto industry has said that they believe a goal of about 50% of EVs in 2030 is the right target and realistic. There are now CAFE fuel economy regulations that kind of provide a backstop that are basically in line with that number in 2030. We have more than enough capacity to satisfy that number. That will be in place. We will either be exporting, or probably some of those plants maybe won't fully, quite honestly, not all will materialize, or some of them will be operating at somewhat lower capacity because it will probably continue to grow after that. But this is just a unprecedented change in what we're doing. The other part of that is the supply chain. Let's see here, let me go back one. Oh, sorry, I'm going forward here. Let's see, go back. With this, when you make a battery, right? So you make a battery cell, that's the big plant, but it's kind of like the final assembly in some ways. You need all those components going in it. We have given out about $6 billion in grants, matched 2-to-1 by industry, to develop domestic supply. So go back 3 or 4 years, we had almost none of the lithium we needed, none of the graphite, number of the minerals. Today, with the investments we made, we're on a path that cover about 50% of all the graphite we need. That was people couldn't believe that. Even just a year ago, we could get to that level. We are basically in a position where we're able to cover probably 70, 80%, if not 100% of the lithium we need with North American supply, largely out of the US. Lithium is pretty prevalent in the Earth's crust. As you start thinking about how to get it and looking at it, more ideas came up. Not all minerals are there. Cobalt, we've dropped the use so much of cobalt that today, when you make nickel, when you mine nickel and iron ore, you get cobalt. It's part of it. There's enough cobalt from that to satisfy battery needs. You don't actually need to have a cobalt specific mine largely anymore. So this is changing rapidly. If you are in this space, and I meet regularly with the auto industry supply chain folks, it is a changing and evolving story. We're not done by any stretch. It's not all figured out, but there's a lot of signs that it will be. But if you're a car company today and you are not like on this and managing it and looking at it and being proactive on it, you really run the risk in 3-4 years you turn around and wow, this thing has changed dramatically. chemistries, technology, other things. So let's talk infrastructure, EV charging. So this chart on the left is a picture of what we need by 2030. Each one of those little dots represents kind of an equal number of chargers. The big yellow block, home chargers. That's how much charging we need at home, in houses. So that's where most of the charging will happen, what is happening today. If you have an EV, it makes it really simple. You're plugging in at home. You then look, the next one is private level 2 chargers. So think, multifamily homes, so people that don't have a place, they don't have a driveway, a carport, whatever, they need some place to charge. Ideally, we need to find slow charging for them because home charging, what's nice about it is it's slow. And when you buy electricity, you pay for how much you use and how fast you use it both. The workplace charging is the next set. Then public level 2 gets a lot of attention. So level 2 are the kind of those slower, lower power chargers out publicly. Decent number, but not that much. And then the last one, fast chargers. Now those are expensive. There aren't nearly as many as we need, but that's how many we need to cover the entire US national highway network, not just interstates, but all the major highways. So where we are, we're adding about 1,000 chargers a week in the US. It's amazing actually how many are coming in. We currently have just under 200,000 public fast chargers, and about 48,000 of those are DC fast chargers. So when you compare to the numbers of where we need to be by 2030, we're obviously not there yet, but we're not in 2030, right? We need to keep growing. So if we keep growing at the pace we're growing, we will get there. Today, 50% of trips on major highways. So think about you're taking a vacation or trip 300 to 3,000 miles. Certainly the interstate. I don't know if you lost the screen there on the back. That's all right. That's all right. 50% of trips taken, given where people drive, there is DC fast charging that supports it. By the end of next year, that will be 70%. So we're growing, we're doing well, but we need to do more. We need to go faster, and people need to see it more and be confident that it's there. There is a new connector. Some of you might have heard of this, called the J3400 connector. It's basically the Tesla physical connector. It looks like the Tesla, but has all the back end of some of the open standards that the industry's asked for. That is a new SAE standard that has just been passed. Every automaker has said starting next year, their new cars will come out with that. So it will be basically, it'll look just Tesla, non-Tesla, will all look the same. Of course, we have a mix of chargers out there. There are adapters that are right about to be UL listed. They exist today, but there aren't quite enough of them. There's going to be a ton of adapters that will go from one to the other. For 4 or 5 years, it'll be a bit messy. You'll have a car that's native with the old type of charger. You'll have the new type, but there'll be adapters in between. I have used them myself. They work pretty well. So I think that will get us through to having one national standard, which will be huge, because that will now open up Tesla. If you haven't heard, Tesla has agreed to open their network to all the other brands if the brands agree to switch to their adapters. That was the deal that they struck. And that basically now, if you drive a Ford or a GM and every brand's kind of getting there, you have access to all the Tesla superchargers, which makes a big deal. Reliability is getting better. That has been a bugaboo of just kind of pulling up to a charger and it not working or not working well. A lot of time, half of that is just not working. Half of it's human error, which means it's too complicated because we're human beings and it's just too complicated. Can't figure it out. So customers have to be able to walk up and it just works. There is something called plug-in charge, which every Tesla has had, and is now we are working to make it a universal standard so everyone can do it, where you just walk up, you plug in, and all of the communication is done on the back end. You don't tap your credit card, you don't do this, you don't push that button. It just starts and charges. The initial experience for the some of the other non-Tesla brands using the Tesla network indicate when people use that, their satisfaction is really high, and we are doing things behind the scenes to make that a universal standard that's easy for everyone to use. So that will be a big, big game changer. The new Ionia network, you may have heard, Stellantis as well as other OEMs have agreed to develop a large national network similar in size to the Tesla network. So that is just starting in its first stages. They haven't actually started build out yet, but it'll be coming soon. EVgo just got $1 billion to make a large network of 7,500 DC fast chargers. That's a loan from the federal government, not a grant, but a loan from us. So it is growing. I wish it was a little faster. I wish we had like right now what we'll probably have in a few years from now, because customers want to see it before they buy, right? And that's the challenge. It's there, but it's hard to see because it's still not quite as prevalent. But with these numbers, I saw a third-party study. I haven't verified the numbers, but actually we now are not, they were projecting the crossover point where we have more EV charging than gas stations, which is an interesting point, right? Because that's kind of a mental thing for people. So this just shows the high power fast charging networks funded through government, the national network that we are building. Just they are starting. These are places, just recent pictures from where the team has been. We also have that last program, that EVC RA. That was a pretty innovative program. We basically said we will pay to fix any broken charge. We went through our database and said that we have like 5,000 ports that were not operating, and we basically said we will pay to fix them and get them up and running because all the powers, everything just needs to be upgraded. So trying to do things like that. All right, running to the end here. So vehicle grid integration. I'm from the Department of Energy. A large chunk of the Department of Energy works on the electric utility grid. We have a lot of people that's all they do. And the entire economy, not just here, but globally, is relying much more on electricity for everything. And at the same time, we are facing huge challenges because of climatic weather events that is causing challenges to the grid. So we are working a lot to harden the grid. Also, we are under cyber threat in this country and in other parts of the world. And infrastructure is a big part of that threat. Will be targeted potentially, and we're working to harden it for cyber threats. So we are working to do those things. At the same time, we are growing it. We have done the studies to look at how much, if you wanted to get to 50%, 60, 70, 80% of EVs, how much electricity does that take? The quick answer, an analogy I give is we will need to increase the amount of electricity we use at about the same rate as we did through the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. Which was basically the growth of air conditioning, well, the growth of refrigeration first in houses, and then the growth of air conditioning. So we need to basically do what we've done, and we need to continue doing that now for the next 40, 50 years. We need to continue to grow that capacity. One of the things about EVs represent a fundamentally different type of load to the grid. They are a load that you can manage and schedule a little bit more. Think about lights. You turn the lights on. I need the lights right now. I don't need them. You just need it, right? Charging. Most charging happens at home. Most charging you can schedule. I can have it. I can plug in 6 o'clock when you get home, have it start charging, or you can start charging at midnight. Most people don't care as long as when they get in the morning, they get the mileage they need. So we're working to develop smart charging technology to allow that to basically reduce the peaks, because one of the things about electricity, this was one of the interesting things going to work for government. You learn all this new stuff. You think about electricity as these peaks, right? You got to cover the peak. Whatever the peak is of that day, you need that much power, you got to cover it. So you build plants for the peak, and then they sit not used most of the time. Unused assets are not a good thing. If you had flat load curve, where it's completely flat, that would be the most cost-effective and efficient system. We're working to use EVs. They're big enough and schedulable enough to fill the valleys, fill those valleys. And so when you have huge amounts of solar, you maybe store some of that, and then you use it at different times of day when you need it for the charge. So the combination of battery for storage, as well as batteries and EVs, and that schedulability will allow us to meet the future demands of an electric grid better than we can today. So just summary, battery related issues, right? The big challenges, continue to work on those. I do have confidence, though, we'll get there on cost and diversification, the supply chain, and continue to build out the infrastructure, both the grid side and the charging. I wanted to spend a minute just to touch on something completely different, because I figure this is something you probably don't hear a lot about. Aviation. So one of our challenges, how do we decarbonize all of aviation? Well, in the case of aviation, when you look at where the fuel is used, it's largely used at cruise, at international flights. That's just where the power is needed. The density of batteries and the density of hydrogen are just not in a position. Hydrogen has other issues with the safety factor. I've learned a lot about aviation. The safety factors in aviation are unbelievable. We don't believe form significant options in the next, 30, 40 years, maybe out towards the end of the century. But batteries will become, we think batteries will actually be a key part of hybridization in planes. So we're working right now with NASA and all of the engine companies in aviation to put about maybe a megawatt to 2 megawatts a wing of power. And that basically helps you with a little bit of lift. And then you have your engines can be smaller and more operationally efficient at cruise. And that can give you about 10, 15% improvement. So batteries will become there, but not to propel the whole plane, but just to help out. So what you need is biofuels. You need low carbon liquid fuels. The good news, and I have a whole team that works on this, it is amazing. You get with chemists, they can take molecules, these molecules, they can make them, they can convert them. We know today how to cost effectively make liquid biofuels. 10% of all gasoline is ethanol based. We know how to make it lower greenhouse gas basis, which is a key thing. How do you reduce the greenhouse gas emissions from them? The question is, and this was part of our strategy, I mentioned up front when we were looking at strategy, how much resources available? So one of the things I met with my auto industry colleagues back, they said, well, just use all this low carbon liquid fuel. We said, well, we have enough. So this chart on the right, this is a bar chart. It shows how much in gasoline gallon equivalent, how much energy we need in 2050 for the top is light duty, then heavy duty, then off-road and aviation. So I'll zoom in on that. So this is what the need is and that works out to be something like 160 billion gasoline gallons equivalent. So if you zoom in just on that lower section right there, those colors basically show the blue is aviation, the orange is off-road, and then you can imagine the green that's not shown would be massive. That's how much we need to support those sectors. The third bar, that's how much available biomass we have. So when you think biomass, we're talking about when you grow crops around the country, all the stuff that hits the ground, the waste carbon that's in there, all of that. The pulp and paper industry, all the waste stuff that hits the ground from that. Animal manure, human manure, municipal solid waste, all of that has carbon and hydrogens, and we can convert that over to liquid fuel. That's essentially what petroleum is, right? It took old biomass and carbon and took 1 billion years of compression and made oil in the ground. We can do that today, but do that in a very quick process. What this tells you is we have enough to cover aviation, and we won't be fully successful in everything, and maybe a few other sectors, but you don't have nearly enough to cover all the others. So what we said is we need to prioritize all of our fuel on sustainable, all of our biomass and sustainable aviation fuel. And we have a plan, as I mentioned, we've gone through, we know exactly what those different biomasses are, how much we have available, how to grow it, how to convert it. There is a target that has been set by the US airline industry and the US government that by 2030, we'll have 3 billion gallons of sustainable aviation fuel. That's 10% of the fuel we use. We are just about to publish an announcement that shows that we now have 2 to 5 of potentially available capacity based on current announcements and based on market pull. So we are at a point where we can get there to hit those numbers. This chart on the right shows what those greenhouse gas emissions are. The blue is like where it has been over time. And what it basically says is if we don't do anything, the top line is just growth because aviation is exploding across the US and globally. Each one of that wedge chart shows first and foremost, take all the best aviation technology and assume every plane is updated to today's best technology. Then improve the emissions and the efficiency. And then what's left is the green. After you've done every operational efficiency, every airplane efficiency. And by the way, it is the new airplanes that are on test. We're about to put the first one up in the sky. It's a NASA joint with Boeing. Looks very different than today's planes. That is likely to be the planes that really will be flying in 2030 to 2060, 70. But that will get you efficiencies, but at the end of the day, you need low carbon liquid fuel. You cannot get anywhere close to zero without it. This has now become a global consensus. That was not the case 3 or 4 years ago, but I've just recently got out of a large global meeting. I would say every place in the world has aligned. This is the path we've got to get to. What does that take? A number of you maybe know the Secretary of Energy, Secretary Granholm, former Governor Granholm. She's a great person to work for. When we're going through everything, she says, great, Michael, how many refineries? How many do you need? How can we build it? Do we know the number? And the answer, I gave her a specific, it was in that 400 to 500 range, but we decided how many refineries do we need? How many do we have today? How fast can we build them? And the answer is we need to basically do what we did when we built ethanol over 10 years. We need to do the same thing in the next 10 years and the next 10 years. Is that achievable? Yeah, that's achievable. That is practical. It can be done. The economics can be made to work if everyone in the industry is going along at the same time. You know, aviation fuel goes up and down in price a lot. So sometimes it's really low, sometimes it's really high. Stability is a value, and bio-based fuels will be much more stable. So again, we've scienced out what it will take, how you can get there. And we've done the same with, you know, maritime, with rail. So here's my summary overall. Transportation decarbonization while meeting everyone's needs and making it affordable, right? That's the goal. Challenges are big, but we have the technology, and I think we have the industrial wherewithal as a country to do it. These industries, the aviation industry, the light duty industry, trucks as well, these are global industries. Our global competitors are working very hard at this. If we don't, we will literally be left behind. And in a number of cases, this is now, as we've seen, you know, waves of coming in of different cars from different parts of the world. China is clearly growing its automotive industry. They are exporting their cars. They are doing them largely as battery electric because they know they have a cost competitive advantage there. If we are not fully competitive in that space, and the same thing can be said for aviation, same thing for aviation, if we are not fully competitive, these critical US industries run the risk of being left behind. So as government, one of our number one things we think about is how do we make sure our US industries can have absolutely every opportunity to be as fully competitive as possible in that global marketplace, while making sure we're meeting people's needs, making sure it's affordable for the average business and consumer, and addressing climate change. All right, that's what I want to share with you. I'm glad to take questions. I hope that you guys have some questions in there. Oh, we got something about back there.
I'm mentally getting electric vehicles based on the new Charger. I kind of like the way it's electric. And I agree that home charging, local use, all that, you know, works. Where it falls down still, though, is trips. I have 6 times a year I drive to New York to see my 95-year-old mom and other relatives. And the Keystone Quickway I-80,
yep.
It has, I think, 6 chargers readily available over 310 miles. That assumes they're all working. Your numbers may show that, but they are probably very maldistributed. And for that kind of, you know, like I say, I looked it up on the DOT website, and you have to take out, well, this is a employee parking lot for a hospital.
Yeah.
Or I artificially said 5-mile radius. Well, I really don't want to drive 5 miles off the freeway in the middle of Pennsylvania to find it. You still got some work to do. Plus, then I got to sit around to charge it.
No, I agree that the charging, so the goal, right, and so with the government fund for that network, which is just starting to now get in the ground because it took a while, is minimum of every 50 miles, high power charging. The Ionia network will add on to that. The new EVgo network will add on to that. And then the Tesla network being open. And these are all ones that need to be basically, you know, like gas stations. They're within half a mile of the highway type of thing, or if you're out east where you can actually put the gas stations on the highway itself at rest areas, doing that like you can, you know, on Turnpike. So it is definitely not there yet, but I think we will. I think we'll get there. I do think we will get there. The other thing is the time. So the new battery chemistries we're working on the goal is to have them be much more quick chargeable. If you're putting in at 350 kilowatts, which is where we will be in the future, where 150 is where people now, the best state of the art is. Not all vehicles can handle that. But if you can do 150 kilowatts, you can, you know, in 20 minutes, you can get your, you know, from 15, 20% up to about 80%. At 350, that will cut it down a lot more. And then I think that will make a big difference for the trips. But yeah, it's definitely not there yet. I agree.
Michael, over here to your right.
I'm Bob Simpson. I worked for Stellantis and Chrysler, and this is a very impressive presentation, but you started with saying hope and the plan, and you said we can't just rely on hope. We've got to have a plan. The problem with the plan is it's predicated on the idea that carbon is somehow a problem. Without carbon, none of us would be here. And the second thing is also you're worried about greenhouse gases. And it's been shown by reliable scientists that and all the rest of them building these coal plants, you can clean this. You're just this car going to be in big trouble if things don't get straightened out in about 4 months.
Yeah, you know, I would suggest this. We could have a debate about the science of climate change. But even if you said, I don't care about climate change, I can, whatever, it's not affecting me or don't think it. I would make the case, and I've seen when you look globally that we as a country will be in a world of hurt competitively if we are not developing the latest, best technology. And that in every industry I work in, I see rapid industrialization moves in Europe, in China, in Korea, and in Japan. I think we have to ask ourselves, do we want to be part of that or not? So I think that just from a pure industrialization, us saying we're going to, you know, just not advance and stay with the same technology we've used forever while everyone else is moving forward with technologies that actually help reduce that cost, not only for consumers, but for the manufacturers, then you know, that's where the risk is. And we do have to get there without government incentives. That's why I mentioned the battery. The work we are doing in batteries basically puts us at a point without any tax incentives in 2030, 2032 to be at that cost parity. And we are getting there on that battery technology. And that will not just transform automotive, it will transform tons of the places you use batteries, whether it be in your computer, your watch, your whatever other device.
Novacek. With the rapid growth of AI, activity to still make sure there's enough capacity in the grid to support the EVs?
Yeah, that is, we are spending a lot of time on that AI growth. You know, we develop AI technology, but the data center growth, what I have, you know, I'm not a utility expert in coming to it, but I spend a lot of time with utilities now. And these big data centers, the interesting thing is it's very uneven, right? So in 80, 90% of the places, there's no added demand for AI. And then in some places, it is like huge and off the chart demand. That's the only thing they can think about. It is starting to spread out a little more because people are saying, I'll put data centers in other places, but there's a lot of synergy still to centralize it. So we are thinking about that a lot and how you meet those needs. And, you know, they tend to put those data centers where you get a lot of electricity and get them cheaply today. But that is something we are modeling as well. And it is definitely in our core, all of our core work analysis, like how much electricity is needed. It is changing a lot, like, but data centers are a big part of that for sure. You know, the other thing is they have gotten a lot more efficient. It's in the amount of power that would be needed today if these data centers and the processes were as efficient as they were, or inefficient, I guess, when you look at it, just even 5 and 10 years ago would be amazing. That's part of what we're doing, is like developing new, more efficient chips to basically help drive that demand down or manage it as it's growing. But it is growing a lot. So that is, in some places, that the challenge is this unevenness in the growth, right? It's like big demand all at once, and then it sucks up all the capacity, and then it takes a few years to get capacity back up.
The emissions in 2023 were less than in 2023. So that's a big milestone. But there are two other milestones. The first, or the second rather, is when we, as the world, are emitting fewer CO2 emissions, the nature can recycle. So the CO2 concentration will stop going up. The other milestone will be the final one, which was as we bring the CO concentrations back down, we will then not have the bad storms, the droughts will not be as bad, forest fires won't be as bad. All the bad things we're suffering through, especially in the last couple of years, we will get back to maybe where the CO2 concentrations were in 1950, 1900. So when do you see the second milestone when we start reducing the CO2 concentration so we can stop all these bad climate effects? And when do you see we will be at the point where we'll say, okay, it's where we actually want it?
This is a big unknown. Most scientists, if you look at the UN climate panel, you look at the International Energy Agency, independent groups, unfortunately, they predict that because even though there's ambitious policies and goals, that they're not all being met, that we'll get to a point where you don't hit that level of that sustainability and coming down. Now, part of that is a warning to everyone, like everyone's got to follow through and put in place the actions like I'm talking about today to get to that. But the goal would basically be about 2050 maybe, where you kind of see that plateauing. So it's a ways away. So we are basically have to deal with a lot of climate resilience activity for the next few decades, I think, no matter what. It's a big, the Earth's climate's a big global system, so it takes a long time to adjust and come down.
Good morning. I'd like to thank you for being here. One of the things on my mind, I have to quote Ronald Reagan. Hello, I'm from the government. How can I help you? All right. I was hoping you'd prove that wrong today. I don't think you did. But anyways, looking at your charts and so forth, one of the things, you're focused on battery, but the main source there, and you mentioned it, okay, was the fact that the power source, the power grid within this country, we can't withstand weather, okay? No less if the selling of EV, like in just my subdivision alone, if everybody bought an EV, we'd knock down the grid. We can't support it. The fact is the low percentage, or where we're at right now, is probably marginal at best. I mean, you can't even get the power, like another fellow here was talking about, the travel to New York. You can't find these things. There's just so many obstacles. We had a speaker 2 speakers ago was talking about this as well. And we had so many questions relative to probably more negatives than positives in that. I think he left here, and I don't know if he'd ever come back.
I will definitely come back.
Yeah,
I'll definitely come back.
And so it's just, it's good to know, but I keep on coming back to that. Yes, you're from the government and you're going to help me. I don't see that happening. Technology is technology, and I think we're using it too much politically. All right, thank you.
In the time here, I didn't go into the grid side. So I have, as I mentioned, kind of my responsibility to transportation. I have a counterpart that I work with on a daily basis on our teams on the grid side. It is amazing the increase in solar and wind, again, at a low, and it's increasing because of cost, just really, really low cost on the grid. We need to maintain our nuclear fleet. There is actually a lot of work to develop a whole new level of small modular reactors that, if that is successful, will be game changing in of itself. But even without that, getting to the levels of renewables I mentioned on there, getting into the 80% renewables, nuclear, that is definitely in the realm of the possible. That last 10, 15% is going to be really hard. to get to without a doubt, just the way the grid manages. But so that's, let me put it this way. It's not something we're ignoring. It is actively in all the work and the thinking. And we got a whole lot of people working on that part, as well as you mentioned, hardening the grid. How do you, increase, so we think a lot and work every day with utilities. Okay, where you got only, 4 kilowatt lines, how do you bring them up higher? How do you, build out that grid? Those are all things we're going to have to do whether we do electric vehicles or not. The reality, right? So we need to make that investment in any case in the grid.
Hi, thanks so much for your presentation. The overall of what you're talking about seems to be in the commercial world. But what happens wars in the desert someplace? Can you imagine 20,000 Jeeps running around without chargers in the sand somewhere? I mean, what are the military implications of where we're going?
Yeah, we work very, very closely with the U.S. military and our intelligence agencies as well, and they are very, very interested actually in some of these technologies because they actually see. So part of what you can imagine happening is, today moving fuel is hard, and logistics is a key part. I'm not a warfighter, I'm not a military person, but I know like that is a key part of their challenges. And part of what they're looking at though is, for example, you could bring in, and they believe some case more easily, hydrogen, and you have hydrogen that from a local fuel cell that can quickly fuel vehicles. When they look at their power and range needs in some of their forward bases, putting in renewables, so they actually see that they'll use a combination of technologies. In some cases, those electric vehicles give them a significant warfighting advantage that they want to capitalize on as well because of low heat signatures, quiet, things like that. So yeah, how much the military adjusts or changes will remain to be seen, but they are all in on working with us on batteries. I'll just say that, and hydrogen fuel cells. So it's a key part of their technology. You can't operate a modern Navy today without batteries. It just can't operate Navy ships without them. So so that's another key part as well.
In one of your charts, it showed you're doing 1,000 charging stations a week. On the news, they talk about some ungodly amount of money that they've spent and only got 8 charging stations. What's the truth?
So the numbers I have here are the truth. There's a broad range of types of chargers. So the national network funded under the infrastructure law for high power charging, which are being implemented by the states. That money has gone out to the states, and that picture I showed are showing those charging stations starting to come up right now because it took, takes them a year to put under contract, get it going, do all those things. It's kind of like building a house. They say you look, at first you don't see any activity, it's all in the ground, all the foundation work, then it starts popping up. So you're seeing those are popping up. Those are probably the stories you heard about, well, how many have been built yet? The 1,000 is a lot of, it's private sector money, not just government. That's just, there's chargers going up all over the place around the country for, and a lot of those are level 2 chargers as well, which are the kind of the slower power ones. Those are not home chargers. So there's, while government is helping to fill in, most of the EV charging network is and will continue to be done by private dollars.
And why are we not talking about nuclear powered vehicles?
Well, for light duty, there'd be some challenges there, but we do, the nuclear engineering office is part of our team, and there are some places, ships that could be in the realm of possibility.
Lots of submarines and aircraft carriers out there. I realize
Yep.
that's big stuff.
Yep.
But
Those,
trains, it seemed like a train could be used.
if we, look, when you start looking at technology, those small modular reactor designs, if that technology we can prove out, and again, it's not just a matter of making it technically work and making it work cost effectively and safely and all those things, that will be game changing because now you'll have nuclear at smaller levels, and then you'll start seeing a lot more opening up of thinking, I think, around where nuclear could potentially be used. That's a big push of the department. It's just those small modular reactor technologies. That's it, like it sounds, smaller, more modular, rather than these large mega nuclear stations that are just today just not cost effective to build in many cases.
Any other questions for Paul or Deb or Paul?
They got off easy. Oh, I think we got one over here.
You have a question? Okay.
Mike, good to see you
Good to see you.
again. Those of you who don't know me, Alex Dominique, very recent retiree. Is this on? No?
I think so. I can hear you good.
Okay. I was just curious and don't want to get into the debate. I mean, we all obviously agree CO2 needs to come down. I was just curious if the government ever did a study about another approach to this, like planting more trees or more biomass, and whether that's even in the realm of feasibility or not.
Yeah, no, and so when we look holistically at the entire, that CO2 equivalent, because there's a lot of other things that create global warming besides CO2, and you look at pathways to get there, right? You can reduce certain things, using the biomass and basically increasing some of that for purpose-grown fuels was embedded in what I kind of, those numbers I showed you for aviation. Some of that is new crop. There's other things though, carbon capture, direct air capture. There's some things actually about advanced soil absorption of carbon and technology in that space. There's actually some things on advanced erosion of rock, basically get parts of the earth to absorb carbon better. So those, what we call carbon reduction technologies, are actually very heavily being researched and looked at. I wouldn't say we have any that are like a silver bullet that you have really high confidence in, but there are definitely things there that we can do. And direct carbon capture and sequestration absolutely is, I think, now a core part of, climate reduction plans pretty much everywhere. But a lot of that is direct air capture is really, really, really expensive to do right now. I mean, it much higher cost than it. So that's a challenge. But other types where you have a point source of CO2 and can grab that CO2 from that point source, and you can either sequester it, or my team's working on technology to take that CO2 and basically make liquid fuels with it through a CO2 to fuel pathway. Very interesting. Takes a lot of electricity. So like with all the stuff we talked about electricity, that would bring it up to a whole new level. But maybe 2050 and after, we have a lot more electricity available. I mean, 2050 is 30 years off, 25 years off. So think about 25 years ago, 25 years from now, a lot can happen.
Well, any place where I get a hold of it?
Yes, I'm going to do that. I need to take a quick look to make sure there are no slides that can't be done, but 98% of it will all be public, if not all of it.
Published? Is it available like today?
I just need to take a quick look to make sure I don't have anything in there that's not publishable. So, and then I'll get it to Deb and the team here, and they'll distribute it however they do or post it. Dale.
We'll put it on the website, Mike.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the attention.
That's okay. I'll ask you. Yeah, am I live? Okay. One from the website. Regarding the entire world, China
last question.
may be producing and marketing large numbers of EV. What's China doing to reduce their CO2 emissions?
There was a quick question online. Question was, what's China doing to reduce their CO2? They are definitely pursuing, like in transportation, all these spaces, these technologies. They have a plan that they have announced of where they're basically coal emissions they're going to be reducing, as well as their other industrial sources. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Michael. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for attending. Be safe going home. Have a great winter. Be safe, and we'll see you in February, our next meeting. Bye-bye.